So good morning. No, I'm not Clive Neal. I don't even talk like I'm doing. Thankfully, Clive agreed to swap time slots with me because I've got to go back to NASA headquarters for some meetings. Unfortunately, I'm now beholden to Clive, and most of you know what that means. Thank you, though, Clive, and thanks, Sam, for accommodating this as well. Greg took a lot of shots there. Now I'm up here, and certainly I can answer some of those questions. I'm going to walk through the status of the Lunar Discovery and Exploration Program. Certainly CLPS is a big part of it, but there are other aspects to it as well. Let me start walking through that. I'll skip through some of the ones that maybe you've seen some of these charts already earlier. I do want to start out, though, and this is germane to what was just discussed, is Science Strategy of the Moon. This is a document that we have developed in my office, in the Exploration Office, and Ben Bussey has been key to this, is working with Jake, Sarah Noble, Brad Bailey, and others. And I also has reached out to the community for input as well. We even provided this to the NAC a number of months back to get some initial feedback too. And really what we're trying to do is develop, and this is not going to be a static document, this is going to be something that's going to evolve over time as we learn more from the science investigations that we do conduct with CLPS and with the human missions. The strategy is obviously to use CLPS. I mean, this is the whole reason why we developed CLPS. We're trying a different model to do more science all over the surface of the moon. And so I won't read through these words, but certainly we're going to be looking at continuous cadence of instruments, technology development, payloads to fly. And we're also in the midst of developing kind of an international strategy that I'll talk to a little bit here in a few slides as well, because we have great interest from the international science community to fly on CLPS as well. So here's kind of just a menu of what's in the Lunar Discovery and Exploration Program. Certainly I talked about CLPS. We are planning for 2 deliveries per year, and we've got 2 in 21, one with Astrobotic, one with Intuitive Machines, and my intent is to maintain that cadence of 2 deliveries per year. There may be some additional opportunities flying CLPS. You heard Nikki talk about STMD. You heard Greg talk about HEO. There may be other things we want to fly that we could utilize CLPS from a commercial standpoint to get to the surface of the moon. So we'll be looking at additional opportunities there. We're going to drive towards more community-driven science. I'll talk a little bit more about that on a specific slide here. Within LDEP, as we call it, I also have the budget to develop the instruments that fly on the CLPS missions. DALI, which a lot of you are probably familiar with, development of advanced lunar instrumentation. This is taking really the TRL-3 instruments up to TRL-6. What we're trying to do there is build the pipeline, not just for near-ready instruments, but upstream to continuously feed that pipeline of capability to fly. Viper, you heard about probably from the administrator and the web feature that was released on Friday about our in-house rover. Jim Morehard talked a little bit about it this morning. And we're looking at getting that to the South Pole region by late 2022. But we're looking forward beyond that to do commercial rovers after that. The reason we went with the in-house build with Viper is we're leveraging heavily off of the mission concepts from the resource prospector days. And so an independent assessment team last year concluded that really the quickest we could get a rover to the surface was to leverage those mission concepts because they'd already been through prototyping, environmental testing, and so forth like that. But we're going to look at commercial opportunities as well, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a little bit. We're looking at long-duration rover investments. Certainly down the road, we would like to be able to fly RTG-type rovers where we don't have to worry about solar or the night. We can go into the permanently shadowed regions. Certainly there is technology out there. We know how to do that. We've been doing it on Mars for years. LRO, the mission operations, is now under LDEP. So we're happy to be working closely with Noah and his team on LRO. And then we've got small sats as well. We're looking for other opportunities to fly science instruments on smaller platforms such as CubeSats and SmallSats. I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a little bit. And then one special unique part of LDEP is ANCSA, the Apollo Next Generation Sample Analysis. Sarah's going to talk in more detail on that, but the funding comes out of LDEP, and we're looking forward to early November timeframe of moving forward on that. So pretty exciting there. So let's talk a little bit about CLPS. We initially awarded 9 contracts to these companies you see here almost a year ago now. I can't believe it's been a year. Chris is laughing over there. It's been a sprint for a year, I know. We immediately turned around and released the first delivery task order, and we awarded, actually we awarded 3, but one was to Intuitive Machines, Astrobotic, and Orbit Beyond. I won't go into a lot of detail, but Orbit Beyond ran into licensing agreement issues. So we mutually agreed to terminate their delivery task order. But Orbit Beyond still remains on the CLPS contract, and we are looking forward to seeing some future proposals from them on future task orders. Intuitive Machines and Astrobotic, I already mentioned, they're targeting July 2021. And we're looking at future on-ramps. And in fact, we accelerated the first on-ramp to this year to bring on enhanced lander capability. You heard Greg talk, you've heard Nikki talk, you've heard a lot about there is interest to fly heavier payloads sooner than later. And so what we want to do is bring on some additional companies that may have enhanced lander capabilities so that we can start looking at flying larger, heavier payloads, such as maybe prototype power units, maybe prototype ISRU type tech dev payloads, something for HEO to inform the future landers, as Greg mentioned, so that we've got more flexibility earlier on, particularly in light of this 2024 mission that we're trying to reach. So we're looking in next month, we'll be announcing additional providers that will join the 9 CLPS providers. Here I mentioned Astrobotic Intuitive Machines again. This was a picture in a high bay up at Goddard when we announced that back in May of the delivery task orders. The instruments to fly on CLPS. Now I think this community is probably pretty aware. We had 2 different calls. One which was NASA internal, NASA provided lunar payloads, and then we did the LCIT-P call. This was really to get things moving fairly quickly. We were looking for near ready or ready to fly instrumentation, tech dev type payloads so that we could then manifest on the early delivery task orders. And in fact, on the NPLP call, we've been working with Intuitive Machines and Astrobotic to determine the manifests for each of those. And then the LCIT-P instruments will be talking to the next awardees on the next delivery task orders for those which we'll be looking at delivering in 2022. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about that, but we're not looking to do those separate calls. That was, again, to get things moving fairly quickly. We're looking to have, a call per year, and so that we'll be looking at more PI-led type instrument calls. So we'll see if I can do it. This is actually Ben's slide, and see if I can do this justice, and he'll run up to the mic if I misspeak. But this is kind of the scenario we're starting to lay out for, the next delivery task orders, really up to the next 7. So I've mentioned the first 2 deliveries. The next task orders, 19C and D, will be those that deliver the LCIT-P instruments. I mentioned that. And don't hold me responsible for the nomenclature of the task order numbering. I'll defer that one to Chris and his team. But it does make sense, actually, from a tracing standpoint. So we're looking at doing an AO for PI proposed instruments in early next year. And so the approach we're taking is we would state the locations for these deliveries. And I say 3 deliveries because you'll see down there, it's really 20B, 21A, and 21B. And we're looking at both polar and non-polar because we don't want to just focus on one area. We do want to focus on the pole, and it doesn't have to be the South Pole, it could be the North Pole as well. But there are so many other interesting areas we want to go visit on the surface of the moon as well. So we want to try to provide as much flexibility as we can on locations. So if you look at task orders 20B, 21A, and 21B, we would allow PIs to propose science that are optimized for those locations, okay? And we know where there is huge science interest from this community. There have been so many different reports, particularly coming out of special action teams out of the LEAG, of where we want to go. So I think we all know that there are a lot of different locations we want to go to. There are also some high value location agnostic type instruments, so that just because we specify a location, if the instrumentation that PIs want to propose to us, it doesn't matter where they really want to go. Take, for instance, could even be a heliophysics solar wind instrument. Great, those are welcome. Now, you'll see that I put in here 2 different bullets that are in yellow. So I wanted to point this out. And this is where we are looking for feedback from this community. International payloads could be incorporated into these task orders, and we're looking at it kind of in 2 different ways. And we've had a lot of discussions with our international partners who are interested in flying on CLPS. One is we can work with our international colleagues, and they can do their own separate calls for instruments and develop instruments. And in coordination with them, we can tell them what kind of instruments would be very interesting and complementary to fly on future CLPS missions. And then we could once they've developed those instruments, they could deliver them to NASA, and we could make them as part of the task order that or the call that we put out for the US PIs, and say, we've got these international instruments that are going to fly. Please propose back to us how you would use these instruments with your proposed instruments as a suite, per se. Another approach could be that we do a joint call, potentially. And this is where we coordinate with specific international colleagues and do a joint call for instruments. So they've got the international PIs, we've got our US PIs talking to each other, and potentially do it in parallel and decide at the same time. These are just 2 approaches we've been brainstorming in our office. Again, I ask that you provide feedback either today to Ben. Ben will be here all day today and tomorrow. Brad Bailey's in the back, Sarah as well. We're really looking for feedback to figure out how the best way to do this. As I mentioned, future instrument calls will be every 1 to 2 years. We'd like to be able to do it annually, but maybe that doesn't make sense. Maybe that's too much pressure on the PI community to do an annual proposal. So again, feedback to us would be helpful for us from a cadence standpoint. But each call, we could look at feeding multiple deliveries, right? If we award, say, like we did before, 13 instruments, we could basically parse those out to multiple deliveries, not just one delivery mission or lander. So all that, keep in mind. We're evolving and growing this process together with you, the community, with our CLPS providers. So all the feedback is welcome. I think I spent so much time on that slide, it's stuck. There we go. So a little bit about the Viper rover. So again, I mentioned to you why we're doing it in-house. It was for speed, to get a rover to the South Pole as soon as possible. These are the instruments that are going to fly. The neutron spectrometer system, the near-infrared volatile spectrometer system. Those were also in the mission concept for the Resource Prospector. So was the Trident drill as well. What you'll see a little bit different is M-SOLO, we call it. It's a mass spectrometer observing lunar operations. And this is basically taking a commercial off-the-shelf type spectrometer and making it space rated. The Kennedy Space Center has been leading this effort. So this is the instrument package we're going to take on the Viper rover. Again, it's really looking for the volatiles, right? The ground truth of the volatiles. That's what we want to do. So we're off and running. In fact, tomorrow there's a snapshot review at Ames on this project. And if everything goes well, we'll be looking at delivering this in late calendar year 2022. I mentioned on LDEP that we have other aspects too. I mentioned Simplex. I'm proud to say, and Bethany's here, and I am not going to try to talk to science because that's not fair. She's right there. But we're excited about this because Trailblazer was picked for Phase A/B studies, and we're excited about working with our Planetary Science Division colleagues, who's funding this through with a couple of others as well. And at the end of the Phase A/B studies, we'll determine whether or not it's going to be selected to go into confirmation and development. If that's the case, then LDEP will take over Simplex. This has a lot of potential to be a very exciting mission on a small platform. So we're really, really interested in how the Phase A/B studies turn out in this. ANCSA, I mentioned, again, I'm not going to go into detail. Sarah's going to provide more on this. But again, it's imminent on when we start those activities at the curation facility at JSC. This kind of looks a little bit the same as what Marshall was showing, but what I wanted to emphasize here is that, yes, we want to do lunar science, but we also want to do cross-discipline science, right? The CLPS offers multiple science opportunities, not just lunar science. Heliophysics is very interested, as I mentioned earlier, to put instruments on the surface, look at the interaction of the solar wind with the regolith, which really is part of that water cycle we're starting to determine. Astrophysics is certainly interested, particularly on the far side, where it's radio quiet, potentially to put up a radio array telescope. All of these type of things that we want to do cross-discipline science using CLPS. We want to use static landers and rovers, as I mentioned before, not just on the poles, but everywhere that it's scientifically interesting we want to go. We can do orbital analysis as well. We have the capability through CLPS to do small sat deployments into orbit and do data acquisition from orbit as well. And then we've heard a lot about ISU as well. ISRU. Let's see, it's sticking again. There we go. So I think this may be close to my last slide, but I think you heard a little bit from Jake and from Greg, but we're working very closely with the Human Exploration Operations Mission Directorate to develop the strategy, the science plan for that Artemis 1. Or excuse me, Artemis 3 for the landing, but the first human return mission to the surface of the moon. Because we have to start making investments now in the science instruments and tools that the crew will take to conduct that science. But we won't stop there. Obviously, we're looking at Artemis 4 and 5 and beyond as well. So again, you heard that, that we're working very closely together, science with the HEO, and STMD to make that happen for the 2024 mission. And that is part of the science strategy at the moon. Ben stole my thunder. Yes, there's going to be a workshop, and it's planned for April of next year to really just start discussing the science enabled by crews going to the South Polar region. That's going to be a very valuable workshop. Looking forward to conducting that and being a part of that as we move forward. And with that, by the way, if you hadn't noticed this yet on nasa.gov, this is the goddess of the moon, Artemis, a new logo that our administrator unveiled last week during the IAC week. This is my wallpaper now. It's just awesome. I just love that. And you can do it in different colors too. Anyway, with that, I'll open it up to questions. I know I went a little bit over, but more than happy to try to answer your questions.
I'm Clarke, JPL. So for the DOLI program with a stronger emphasis on science, it really sort of implies further along in technology development, start, basically further down in TRL. So is there anything you can do to create an option to start at something like a TRL 3 or 4 to push a technology forward? I mean, it'd be quite, mature enough to stay within a cost cap where the emphasis is on science and more proven capability.
So as I mentioned, DOLI certainly is one avenue that we're using from TRL 3 to 6 for advanced lunar instruments. We're also working with our STMD colleagues to do just that as well. We're helping prioritize what kind of tech dev payloads that we can fly early on. I mentioned ISRU. We're kind of looking at, there's water extraction from regolith and there's water extraction from water ice. We're looking at potentially flying two different test units to be able to do that on separate future CLPS missions to kind of do that kind of stuff and kind of really mature the technology to see which way do we want to go, right? And so that's helping out our technology friends, helping with the exploration objective. So yes, we're absolutely on track to do that.
Jonathan Weinberg, Ball Aerospace. So this
John?
Related to Pam's question. I mean, originally when LSITP and the NASA equivalent came out, said we want to get started, we want to get going, and we just want TRL6 and greater instrumentation. Is that going to continue to be the case for the LSITP call then, that you're only looking for TRL6 instruments, or is there going to be some technology development embedded into the program as well?
So that's a good question, because we've had conversations in my office about, I mentioned we want to go more towards PI-driven instrument suites and so forth, right? We're looking for a way to keep that option open as well, where we can fly those that are near ready. And so what we have to do is find out how we can do that from an overall budget standpoint, number one. And number two, how maybe there's some cost sharing we can do across the directorates to open up more CLPS opportunities to fly those types of things. So good question. We're actually actively talking about that right now.
And are you in the future going to limit CLPS to instrumentation, or are you going to include things like small sats that can be deployed on the surface or from orbit or something like that?
So the CLPS providers on there now, actually, some of them do have that capability that they proposed when they proposed to get onto the CLPS contract last November. We haven't put out a task order for those types of things yet, but we do have the capability to do that. So we'll be looking at how we start infusing those type of task orders along with our landers as well.
So maybe we could look for another program in the future that would have a call for small sats or small contained missions that get a ride on CLPS providers.
Potentially, yes. Yeah, we're looking at ways to do that.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Hi, Steve. Mike Provenzano from Astrobotic.
How you doing?
Good. So
no, you're not allowed to ask me a question.
So
where's
you and
Dan?
your team have done a good job developing growth inside of NASA and external in the community with MPLP call and LCP call. You mentioned on your slides that there will be combined opportunities for internal payloads and external payloads to be done together. How do you envision, or how are you thinking about the teams? How would they collaborate if it's going to be a PI-led mission? Would that PI probably be in industry, or do you think that would be in NASA going forward in the upcoming missions?
It could be both. It could be either, really. What I mean by combined is we're not going to target NASA in-house and then academia, industry. It's going to be one call that goes out where anybody can propose from the U.S. side.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
Yep.
Hi, Steve. Renee Weber from NASA Marshall.
Hi, Renee.
I have a two-part question. First part, many of the instruments that are in the DALI and the LCP pipeline do sort of desire to eventually be able to not only survive through, but survive during the night and operate through the night. And I'm curious of whether the increased cadence for these CLPS task orders will include that capability.
So we're looking at that. Some of the CLPS providers said that they can survive the night now. Of course, we're going to have to see how that works. But if there are specific instruments that require that to achieve the science objectives, then that would be a requirement in the task order. That would go out and say, okay, we've got these set of instruments, either all or a subset of these have to survive the night. It must be able to acquire data for this long, say 100 hours. That will be in the requirement for the task order. And so when we get proposals back from the CLPS providers, they have to show how they'll meet that requirement.
Second part, how will the CLPS model feed into Discovery and New Frontiers programs?
You know, we're starting to get more questions about that. So what I'll say there is, right now we're not looking at how to do that. We're trying to get started with CLPS and get some runway, behind us. So certainly we'll talk about that with our Planetary Science Division colleagues at some point when it's probably the right time. But right now it's not. They focus on their programs. We're trying to get, LDEP going. It's only been a year, and we got to get some successes, I think, under our belt first. But certainly that remains kind of in that, let's talk about that when the time's right.
The time's right.
Hey, I got a right answer.
It must be right because you lost a couple people between Renee and me. West Patterson APL, a little bit parallel to what Renee was asking, but just generally, I mean, I think it's great, all of these opportunities, instruments and the clips and everything. We're getting off the ground really quickly, but I'm curious because we're thinking about the decadal and, you know, Discovery, New Frontiers, flagship class missions. What you guys have been thinking on your end about larger payloads and what you see as you're willing to support, that's the wrong word. Maybe just what your vision is of those medium and large class missions might be to help inform us on what we should be thinking about and trying to make sure we're all speaking the same language.
So this would be more of a discussion that I would have with, again, the Planetary Science Division as far as science objectives and with this community. What I'm doing now with that on-ramp is trying to increase the capabilities and bring them on board first and then start talking about, because I already know mobility is a key part of our exploration strategy for science and for human exploration for STMD. And that's why I say multiple rovers, right? And that's where I'm looking at larger lander capability to take larger rovers to do the science. The discussion that you're talking about, I have not had with my colleagues in Planetary or with this community about what you would envision. But that's something I think like workshops where we could start, once we've got the capability, start talking about that and how we line that up. I think that's an interesting discussion to have in preparation for a decadal. Does that make sense? Don't know. I can't comment to that. But as we develop the capability with our commercial partners and it's there, I think then it becomes more of a priority in my mind to be able to utilize it the best way we can to meet science objectives.
Right.
I know that probably wasn't a straight up answer, but I really don't have a concrete answer at this point.
Parvati Prem, APL. Hi, Steve. That was great. So this is a simple question, but do you all have a date in mind yet for the April meeting? And I ask because, with the decadal and everything coming up, I know it's a busy year. There are lots of plans for workshops and things that I've heard of. So do you all have a date in mind yet?
So it's the month of April. That's what Ben is really helping and Jake and so forth are working. But there's the logistics of securing a place and doing all that kind of stuff. So that's why a date hasn't been picked yet, but they did look at the April timeframe to get on the other side of some of the major conferences and stuff like that. Definitely we'll let everybody know when we've secured a date. Right, Ben? Okay. Go ahead.
That too. So this science strategy of the moon document, is this something that's currently available for the community to take a look at and provide feedback? Or is it really the April meeting is our first chance to do that?
I think we could make it available. I mean, like I said, we shared it with the NAC and got some initial feedback and we're about done updating it. And, this when I was talking with Ben about this, because really Ben really was did the heavy work lifting to get that document in the shape that it's in, is I'd like to be able to share it with the community and get some feedback on that. At what time? Probably soon when I say that, because we're just finishing up the revision in-house. Maybe the workshop's the right time. I would think we'd probably want to share it ahead of time so that we could talk about it at the workshop. So that'd probably be the best way. There's an action to Ben. So he's shaking. Yes? Good.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.